The purpose of life is ultimately doing your duty. And if I can give you guys a religious parallel, the attitude of some of the Puritan sects, Christian sects, was not all that different from the attitude of the Stoics. And let me put a phrase on the board. This is one of the reasons why the Puritans believed that idling was sinful. You know what I mean by idling, right? Playing at cards, reading books that didn't get you closer to God, not getting up early in the morning and working hard, having too much sex that wasn't involved with procreating, you know, this kind of thing. Yeah, I wanted to get your attention there. Good, I hope I woke everyone up. Now anyway, according to Stoicism and the Puritans, your lives are not... Your lives are technically not your own. When you waste time, according to Puritanism, you're wasting God's time, not your time. You live on borrowed time. Similarly, Stoicism believed you are just a tiny part of the Logos. You are here for a what? You're here for a purpose or for a reason. Of course, you had no place in choosing your purpose, but that doesn't change the fact that you have a purpose. Everything happens in accordance with divine reason here. And simply because what you want isn't the same thing as what you ought to do, doesn't mean you ought to deny what you ought to do. You ought to do your duty to the Logos. You will not be happy in a hedonistic sense, but you will have earned the right to be happy. And that happiness will not be some kind of emotional, physical thing. That happiness will be a sort of internal sense. I did my duty well. Now, I understand that doesn't sound like something too much like what most of us want out of life. But it is an attitude that can help to get you through a life that you might think is what? Difficult and hard to bear. Because if you keep in mind, and let me put this on the board. What did the Stoics have to say about pain and suffering? Any takers? Yeah, Kier.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, pain and suffering are not evils. Pain and suffering ought to be regarded as good things. Because things that bring about other goods are not bad things. They ought to be regarded as good things. Now, I want to lay this out as bluntly as I can. The Logos does not love you in a passionate way. But the Logos loves each and every one of you in a dispassionate way, which doesn't sound much like love. Imagine if I told my wife that I loved her like the Logos loves her. I would hope she would get the divorce papers filed right away. Yes, dear, I love you very much. I love you in the same way that I love all other rational beings. That sounds like our good friend from Star Trek. Mr. Spock, I don't think I'd want to have a relationship with that guy. In other words, the kind of love that we want out of life is typically an attached love, a passionate love. Now, what Stoicism says is that the Logos loves each and every one of us dispassionately. The reason that we face hardships isn't because the Logos doesn't love us. It's because the Logos does love us. Hardships are thrown our way because we can handle them. And once we have handled them, we will be stronger to face life's next round. If you've ever heard that Nietzschean phrase, "that which does not kill me makes me stronger," that is a phrase that perfectly aligns with this kind of an attitude. Even though I believe Nietzsche would have given the Stoics half the peace sign in other regards, that Nietzschean phrase sounds quintessentially Stoic. That which doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Now you'll notice that even if the Stoics are absolutely wrong about this, there is sort of a psychological value in listening to them. Anyone know what I mean? If you take the attitude that everything happens for some purpose, even if the purposes are not necessarily to my liking, it at least gives me the impression that it's not just chaotic why things are unfolding as they are. In other words, I don't know where the heck I'm heading, but at least I'm heading somewhere for some greater purpose, unbeknownst to me. And if in fact the Logos loves me, the idea is anything that befalls me, the Logos knows that I can handle. And this the text doesn't talk about. But the Stoics also believed, I believe this is a line out of the Stoic Seneca, that the Logos was kind enough that if anything did befall me that I couldn't handle, the Logos gave me what ability? And they didn't recommend this as a first resort. This was a last resort. You know where I'm going with this. In other words, you could end your life at any time. Ending your life for them is, of course, an act of cowardice and a last resort. Now, the reason why it's a last resort is because your life doesn't belong to you. You have duties to carry out. But if indeed these are things that the Logos threw at you that there's no way in Hades you could handle them, the Logos was kind enough for giving you an opportunity to get out as a last resort. Now, you may have noticed that there were several figures, and I want you to know their names. One of the figures is Epictetus, and the other was whom? Marcus Aurelius. The emperor and the slave. The emperor and the slave. Two men who couldn't have come from as different of worlds, but they ended up espousing the very same life philosophy. Because no matter what your lot is in life, it's a fact that what? There will be hardships. You will have burdens cast upon you that you never chose. But nonetheless, according to Stoicism, you ought to carry through. Marcus Aurelius did not like being an emperor. As a matter of fact, in some senses, he understood he was probably temperamentally not suited to be an emperor. He would have rather lived the life of Socrates if he'd had the choice. But because he didn't have the choice, he held the Stoic view that he became emperor because it was his duty to be emperor. And thus, I ought to carry out my duty to Rome to the best of my ability. And for those of you who read the text, this meant doing things that sound very inhuman from my perspective. He knew very well that his wife was a philanderer. He knew that she philandered with some of his top generals. Yeah, that's the nice way of putting it, yeah. He knew, yeah, that's actually putting it very mildly if you know any of the history behind it. I think I forget if it was A&E or one of those, or the History Channel, that actually talked about her in one of their shows. I think it was called The History of Sex. How many of you remember seeing those shows on the History Channel? Oh, there was nothing pornographic in it, seriously. Although some of the conversations were very dicey, I will admit. But yeah, his wife was actually one of the people they talked about in one of the shows. And admittedly, her behaviors were probably the fodder for what crude people might call adult entertainment. But anyway, rather than doing with her what the average emperor would have done, what would Caligula have done with her? He would have had her publicly executed just for fun and enjoyed it. No, what Marcus Aurelius did was promoted those generals. Because even though they were philandering SOBs, he understood that they were good generals for the good of Rome. In other words, it's not about putting yourself first. It's about putting your duties first. It's about understanding that it's not all about you. Give me 30 seconds. I'm just going to note this. Now, granted, I think that the way he dealt with that was kind of inhuman, to divorce yourself from your emotions that much. But one of the lessons I think we can take from this is the Stoic attitude tells us that in the end, when it comes to dealing with life on its terms, we are perhaps better off if we don't take things how? Personally. Thank you. We're probably better off if we don't take things too personally. Because if we do take things too personally, number one, we might be misunderstanding our place in things. Because after all, I am just a very small and insignificant person in a vast universe. And for me to think that the entire cosmos is out to get me or something is actually an arrogant pronouncement. Anyone who thinks the world is out to get them kind of misunderstands their place in things. To think that you matter that much is about as arrogant as it gets, even though it doesn't sound on the surface like arrogance. But yeah, we're better off if we don't take things too personally. Also, because not only is it less arrogant, but if you don't take things too personally and are a little more detached about it, you'll be better equipped to, can I use that phrase that we hear from many old school father figures? Deal with it! Have you ever heard someone say, just deal with it? Well, you are better equipped to just deal with it if you're not too emotionally involved with it. And if you basically understand that in the grand scheme of things, it'll pass. And by the way, they would also counsel that if you get too emotionally absorbed in things, this is my word, not theirs. Guess what usually happens when you involve yourselves with your travails too emotionally and you act out emotionally? Stupidity ensues. As a matter of fact, if you respond to your quote-unquote enemy's challenges, you might actually be doing what? Playing directly into their hands. So this is why when somebody says something insulting to you, you might be better off not taking the bait. Because if you do take the bait, ultimately who does it hurt anyway? You end up hurting yourself. I mean, internally. You also might even hurt yourself externally by doing something brash. Yeah, something brash or rash or just plain old. Those things are almost always stupid, though. I mean, I can think of times when people sort of have given me sort of snide insults. And rather than doing what Stoicism counseled, I sort of, lashed out. Like, dude, when you lash out, not only do you likely escalate a situation that if you just said, let it slide, man. I mean, do I want to fight down the road? I don't mean a fist fight. Everything in life is a potential fight of one sort or another. Do I want to escalate a fight down the road? A fight that there's a good chance I can't what? That I can't win? The answer is Hades, no. I don't want to escalate that, but guess what my emotions tell me to do? They tell me to do the very thing that's not in my best interest. I think Stoicism counsels pretty good wisdom in this case. However, am I running out of time?
46.
Oh boy, I got to end off somewhere. However, some of you may have noticed that Stoicism can be taken a little bit too far. And by the way, if you do take Stoicism too far, Stoics might say you have missed the point. Now, Epictetus' motto was what? I won't talk about him, but please read about him. His motto was bear and forbear. That was how he endured life as a slave. That was also how he endured being tortured on the rack. Even knowing that after his torture, he would go through his life unable to walk properly. His Stoic attitude is partly what enabled him to endure those tragic injustices. Tragic injustices that do what to many other people? Yeah, completely break them, completely destroy them. So in other words, it was an attitude that helped him to get through hard times. Now do keep in mind, if it is taken too far, it could lead to this. I want you to know this word. Does anyone know what the word quietism means? It means inaction. Now many people will say, well, you should just grin and bear things. Let life happen to you, man, because after all, there's certain things you can't do anything about. Well, Stoicism says that, but they also say this. But there are some things that through wise action you can do things about. Stoicism says that you do have a duty to change the world for the good. But you should rationally pick your battles. Reason would tell you there's certain fights that can't be won. And those are ones that you may just be better off grinning and bearing things. Now, it is experience and wisdom that helps a person to know the difference between the two. And if this reminds any of you of the Serenity Prayer, good. Because this very much lines up with the Serenity Prayer. And if you know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous, you've heard of this as well. I mean, this understanding that certain things are out of your control. The only thing that you can control are the things that are within your control. And that's one thing, folks. That's what's in here. Your attitude, how you respond to things. Respond to things in productive ways. That's what Stoicism counsels. I'll take any last questions about Stoicism when we start next time, and then we'll work on chapter 8.